I'm back.
You're back? Back from where?
I'm not sure.
It's Monster Mondays with me, Geoff Arbuckle. It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. You know the spiel, I'm going to say it again anyway. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver every Wednesday, but Mondays, well, they're for me to talk about monster movies. You know, up to this point, we've looked at fabled creatures, creatures of legend, and giant kaiju. What we haven't yet done is look to the stars. After all, monsters aren't just an Earth thing. Sometimes they can come from above, too. Before we talk about those monsters, let's first put a little framing on why this week's feature, Harry Bromley Davenport's Xtro from 1983, even exists. You see, a phenomenon came along in 1982. It's this little movie, maybe you've heard of it. It's called E.T. the Extraterrestrial. That might ring some bells in some listeners' minds, but just in case you hadn't heard of it, it's about this little guy who came down from space, missed his ride home, and befriends a family in a suburban San Fernando Valley neighborhood. It made massive amounts of money, even more than Star Wars did. And it's considered one of the very best family pictures ever made, if not one of the best movies ever made, period. Well, after E.T., everybody wanted a piece of the action, the alien action. There were movies throughout the rest of the 80s like Mac and Me to try to ape off the exact same idea. However, there was a different take on the phenomenon as well. You see, whenever something becomes massively popular, there will always be detractors and contrarians. These people want to either twist the popularity of something or outright reverse the whole idea that was made popular. So we saw a massive increase of alien visitor movies in the 80s. Think we didn't? Well, try turning on HBO in the mid to late 80s and try not to find some sort of alien visitor movie. Turn on broadcast television and you'd see TV shows like V and War of the Worlds. Both of those definitely didn't take the family-friendly alien visitor route. Now we also have Xtro, which is this week's feature. While some can absolutely say this was capitalizing on what I had previously stated, getting in on that alien action, truth be told, this may have almost been like if David Cronenberg made E.T. It's got some weird body horror shit in it, and it has lots of slimy and gross stuff all over it. It's the type of movie that would probably have an unpleasant smell to it, if you know what I mean. Shit gets going early, though. Within the first 4 minutes, we have the opening credits and meet Tony and his father. They are at a British countryside home playing with a stick and their dog. Now, Daddy tosses the stick real far up in the air, and all of a sudden, a hole tears open in space and time, and he's sucked into it. Suddenly, Tony wakes up 3 years later from a nightmare. Tony's mom, played by Bernice Staggers, tells him that Daddy wasn't taken. He actually left them. Now, she's moved on with a new beau, and that guy isn't so sure that Tony cares about him much, considering how much he still talks about his real father. So, boom, in the first 5 minutes of the actual movie, everything you need to know. Dad's gone, Tony knows that he was taken, but Mom thinks that he's just a deadbeat and left. But Daddy was indeed taken, and he's come back to pick up Tony and take him to an extra-dimensional home he's made for himself with these alien things. This is when all the crazy, wacky, gross Cronenberg shit starts to happen. There's Dad's new form, which is this gross crab-walking monster thing. Then he has to be rebirthed back into a human adult form through a poor, unsuspecting woman. There's a mashed up snake, a bunch of alien eggs, and cocooned up nannies. This movie is actually quite shockingly graphic. This movie is a little better remembered these days by those who grew up on cable or at the video store, but at the time, this movie was pretty reviled. TV Guide gave the movie 0 stars. It basically said that the movie was just an excuse to parade all manner of perversities across the screen. The website AllMovie called it pure trash. And Roger Ebert, of course, panned the film, awarding it only 1 of 4 stars. And he called the film ugly and despairing, and further commenting that most exploitation movies are bad, but not necessarily painful to watch. They may be incompetent, and they may be predictable, they may be badly acted or awkwardly directed, but at some level the filmmakers are enjoying themselves and at least trying to entertain an audience. Xtro turns out to be an exception, a completely depressing, nihilistic film, an excuse and sadness. It's movies like this that give movies a bad name. And, Roger Ebert, he often had very colorful ways of talking about something he doesn't like. I think it's kind of funny that this is also the guy who wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which was absolutely an exploitation film that was awkwardly acted, awkwardly directed, and so forth. So it's kind of always funny to hear him say things like that. However, if the movie ever sees the light of print again, it will likely be thanks to Red Letter Media's overwhelmingly appreciative review of it on their YouTube show, Best of the Worst, where they called it one of the better movies they have watched on the show and praised its ability to pay things off that were previously set up in the script. With that said, let's talk about my 3 things that I like about the movie. I will say it is harder to pin down 3 specific things, as this is definitely a movie that is a sum of its parts. There are some very trippy and out there ideas in this movie. It's almost like this was just a blender type of movie. And what I mean by that is that the writers, and by the way, there were 4 of them on this movie, had a bunch of ideas like having an alien, but extra dimensional aliens that had to change their biological forms to be able to exist on their plane or on Earth, depending on where they were. Then there's the this kind of psychophysical connection, I guess you could say, between the father and Tony. When the dad impregnates the poor girl to get a new human body, Tony is covered in blood miles away. It's weird stuff, but that's why I like it. In fact, this is my first thing I want to point out as to why I like it. There is more going on here than simply an alien from worlds we can think of, imagine, or have seen before. You can make the point that in this little exploitation gross out of a science fiction horror flick, there are big ideas about what life elsewhere would be like. Second, the gore in this movie, as well as the practical effects, are pretty spectacular. Now, I'm not a huge fan of gore for the sake of gore. I especially don't like what I like to call torture porn. Movies that are just over the top and cruel violence against characters just for visceral experience. However, I can get behind people like Cronenberg and Lovecraft, those styles of body horror. It's gross, but it's the gross that I can't not look at. The primary example of that in this movie is something that just about everyone who has seen in this movie will remember forever. When Tony comes back home, he's this weird 4-legged monster thing with a monster mouth and what have you. He kills a couple who first happen upon him, and he eventually makes his way to that poor woman's house that I've already mentioned a couple of times, where this alien puts the sucker thing on her face and mouth impregnates her. A little bit later, she's like uber preggers, like with a full-grown man who comes out of her vagina and eats his own umbilical cord. Yoinks. I mean, oh, and to add to that, he also eats some of Tony Snake's eggs and sucks on Tony's shoulder to begin transforming him into another alien like he is, or something. It is some pretty bizarre and really, really kind of for a lack of a better word, kind of sleazy in its portrayal of its gore. Finally, I have to say there are some incredibly clever deaths in this movie. As Tony starts to change into one of the alien things like his dad, he learns how he can bring life to various things. For example, he first starts playing with a top and he makes it spin on its own by simply thinking about the sound it makes when it spins around. He also brings a toy clown to life in the form of a very sinister looking dwarf clown. He makes a toy soldier life-size to kill the woman who lives downstairs for killing his snake. He also uses a toy tank and a panther to kill another guy. It's hard to say whether or not all four of the screenwriters were really actually working on the same story, or if some of the bits like these telekinetic powers and stuff was a different version of the script or cobbled into the Xtro story, kind of Frankenstein style. Whatever the truth is, it somehow works to make a truly unique horror film. This one isn't the easiest to watch. Not only is it a little gory and kind of gross, but it's currently not in print. But you might be able to find ways to watch it. I'd say more give suggestions, but, well, the legality might be questionable. Either way, it's worth taking a look at if you can. Bernice Stegers is just one of those actresses that makes these odd and enticing exploitation movies. Plus, you can see Mariam Diabo play a promiscuous French nanny 4 years before she plays one of the more innocent and naive Bond girls in The Living Daylights. But I don't know, somehow British sleazy horror exploitation just feels classier. Maybe it's all the big idea stuff about the other dimensions and space physiology that makes it just seem a little smarter. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later, and don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure each and every Wednesday, and a new installment of Monster Mondays on Mondays on filmseizure.com, as well as check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday.
Once a man, he is now something more than human. Indestructible, ever-changing, evil. His mission, to avenge, to possess, to destroy.